Is the PS5 Pro coming way sooner than we thought? DualSense Edge reviews are in and you're probably gonna want one. Before we jump into the news, let's do a quick PSA about SSDs. So right now you can get the Samsung 980 Pro for around $220 if you can find it. You can also get the WD Black SN850 for $180 from Western Digital. Unfortunately, it seems to be sold out there. So what you're going to have to do is head over to Best Buy where it's $220 and then get them to price match it. But I've had no issue doing that in the past. Those are the two best SSDs for the PS5, but if anything changes, I will be sure to let you know. How's it going, everyone, and welcome to PSReady. This is the early week news update, and we're just jumping right into it with the first news story, which is the review roundup for Forspoken. So leading up to this game, I think we all kind of had mid expectations for it, just based on, some of the trailers not really having the best dialogue, some of the animations not looking too great, and then leading up to the game, the demo wasn't very good, and then after the demo, leading up to the game's release, we realized that Square Enix only sent game review codes out to a very small list of outlets. Oh, and then also the PC requirements for this game are absolutely insane. And when you look at what the game actually is, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And now here we are a day before the game releases. And yeah, the game is currently at the time of recording this video sitting at a 69 on Metacritic, which is not a great score on its own. But then you got to consider that Square Enix handpicked all of the outlets this game was sent to. And it looks like they strategically sent the game to outlets that they felt would give them, more of a fair shot than someone like a YouTuber who's gonna shred this game the second they get their hands on it. It's not all bad though. People are praising the parkour. They say it's a little too slow, but it is flashy and cool in action and it's fun to use. They're also praising the combat because it's actually pretty varied. And now that Square Enix has gone ahead and updated it since the demo, it actually can get quite fun. And they're saying that despite the story getting a really rocky start and then being rocky throughout the middle of the game, the third act leading up to the end is actually really good and kind of fixes a lot of the problems with the game. Regardless, with the remake of Dead Space coming out in just a few days and other games right around the corner, this seems like a wait for a sale type of game. Now, I haven't played it. I can't give you my firsthand thoughts on Forspoken outside of the demo, but that demo did not impress me. And yeah, again, there's some bigger games coming down the pipe a lot sooner rather than later. So I would wait to see how Dead Space at the very least turns out with reviews, especially if you're picking between those two games. But yeah, this is the first big PS5 exclusive of 2023, and it's kind of like a small smudge on just months of good news for Sony, right? Like PS5s are out there, the DualSense Edge is out there in the wild now with reviewers, and they all seem to love it. We have big games like Spider-Man coming up, we've got the PSVR 2 coming up, and it has a huge launch lineup. Like everything's kind of falling together for Sony, and then this game comes out and doesn't land as well as it seemed like it was supposed to. But this game's been delayed a bunch, it's been kind of hidden from marketing. Overall, it just seemed like a mess that didn't come together and needed to get out there so Square Enix could recoup some of the budget that they spent on this game. And now we have Final Fantasy 16 and Spider-Man 2 to look forward to, which is awesome. We can get past this mess. One game we don't have to worry about, it seems though, is Spider-Man 2, which is supposedly coming out in September or October of this year. Like Sony's given us the nebulous fall release date. And I'm just gonna be real, this is a game that I have no worries about this getting pushed into 2024. The last time we talked about it was when Insomniac showed it off to Marvel. Marvel was like apparently totally shocked at how far along the game was in development. And over the weekend, Yuri Lowenthal, the voice of Spider-Man and Peter Parker in the game, gave an update that kind of was worrying fans if you just take the small snippet of the headline that all the reports are using. But if you read the actual full quote, it makes it seem like the game is going to be just fine in September or October of this year. So what he said exactly is it's a massive game, so I'm still doing a little bit of work. I know they're confident about their release date, and Insomniac has always been good about that. Obviously, I can't really talk about the game much, but I will tell you that it's astonishing. I'm so excited for you to play it. They know they've got big shoes to fill from the last two games, and they've done it. I just can't wait for people to play it. The line that's obviously sticking with people is where he says he's still got a little bit of work to do on it, but that's like performance capture type of stuff. And again, we've already heard that this game was shocking Marvel with how far along it was in development. And if they're just worrying about stuff like VO and performance capture at this point, that says to me that everything else, like the open world, the combat, the gameplay, like everything that's actually hard to develop is exactly where it needs to be. And once they get all of this VO and performance capture done, then they can focus on polishing up the game. And what he said about Insomniac generally hitting release dates is totally correct. Like they had Spider-Man Miles Morales ready to go for the PS5's launch. That game was bug-free across the board. And then soon after that, like just a couple months later, they put out Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which was also It was a little rocky at launch, but they patched it pretty quick, and now it's one of the better games on the PlayStation 5. There's also the fact that this game takes place in New York, just like the last Spider-Man games, and yeah, what can you really add to the New York they've built? They got it pretty damn close to 1-to-1. Honestly, the only one that was closer I think I've ever played was something like the Division 1 or the small section of New York you get to travel to in the Division 2's Warlords of New York expansion. Like, those are always pretty 1-to-1 because that's what Ubisoft was doing with the Division 2, but other than that, I think Insomniac did a great job building a New York that felt believable and real. So the only changes I could see them really making are updating that texture thing they do where, like, if you're swinging towards a building, it fills in all of the different offices in a building as you get closer with random offices. But if you like go around a corner and the building leaves your field of view, if you go back, all of the rooms kind of change. I think they could probably figure something out now to make that a little less noticeable since they're using an SSD and they have way more power in the PS5. They could also make Spider-Man swing faster, taking advantage of that SSD, which would be really cool because he's already pretty fast in the main game, but I've seen on PC you can get mods that make him swing faster if you have an SSD. And the reason that's possible would be because they can load in the map a lot quicker than they could on a hard drive with the PS4. Either way, I think this is just a guaranteed slam dunk for Sony. Insomniac has very rarely in their entire history made even a mid game. Like, honestly, in the history of Insomniac, there's like 3 games that stand out as not being super great. There was like a top-down 4-player Ratchet and Clank game. I think it was called All for One. Then, of course, there was that side scroller that they put out that was published by GameStop of all places. And then finally, their biggest misstep was definitely Fuse, but that really seemed like it was EA's fault. And I honestly will be shocked if this gets bumped out of 2023. I think that's a guaranteed release towards the end of the year, and it's a great time to release a game like this because around Christmas is when everyone gets excited for new Spider-Man content. So yeah, I think we have nothing to worry about here, and it's good to hear Yuri Lowenthal talking so positively about the game. So we already did one review roundup that wasn't so great at the beginning of this video, but now we got to talk about a review roundup for the DualSense Edge, which comes out later this week. I've got mine pre-ordered. I couldn't be more excited to get my hands on this controller, and yeah, the reviews are out and they're really good. Obviously, the one sticking point that literally every review mentions is the battery life. It's not so much that it's worse because I've actually seen quite a few reviews saying that the battery life is pretty much exactly the same as it is on the regular DualSense. It's that the battery life isn't better on a premium controller, because if you're looking at the Xbox Elite controllers, the battery life on those far eclipses the AA battery lifespan of the regular series controller or the Xbox One controller, and the DualSense on its own already has an extremely short battery life. So hearing that, yeah, this thing's getting 6 to 8 hours out of it, I understand why that's going to bother a lot of people, but for me personally, not a huge deal. I've got a power strip conveniently placed right under the couch where I play my PS5, so if the controller dies, I just plug it in and I'm good to go. I also am pretty good about plugging it in when I'm done using it. And then finally, we get that super long braided USB-C cable with this new DualSense Edge, so it's going to feel like an actual wired controller, which is cool. And the reasoning for that is because Sony owns Evo, which is a fighting game competition, and Evo only allows wired controllers and they punish disconnects. So Sony really wants this pro controller to be able to be taken advantage of by their pro fighting game tournament, and that just helps us in the long run. One thing that I've seen reviews be 50-50 on that I'm largely like totally positive on is the back of the controller. So I've seen some complaints that it's not a rubberized grip, it's just the little PS button texture that they have on the back of the DualSense is more pronounced on the DualSense Edge. The complaints lie in it not being rubberized like you'd see on the Elite controllers. I'm gonna be totally real with you guys, I'm fine with that. I've had both generations of the Elite controller. I had the Gears of War edition, and then I had a couple of the Elite Series 2 because I had to keep sending them in to get repaired, and the rubber comes off. It gets this weird white stuff all over it, like white fuzz. I don't really know how to describe it, but if you leave those things in like a container for too long, they get fuzzy and then the rubber disconnects from the controller. It's really gross feeling. So yeah, I'm totally fine with them just going with a textured, more textured plastic like what they have on the DualSense already, because I like it on the DualSense. It stops my hands from getting sweaty, which the Elite Series 2 actually makes my hands sweatier with that rubber that retains heat. So I don't think that's too big of a deal. The thing that's really cool to me personally is the fact that the back buttons, there's only 2 of them. I understand that people want 4 because the Elite has 4, but I always leave the top ones disconnected because it's just too many buttons, right? Like even on my Steam Deck, I have 4 buttons on the back, but I only ever end up using the 2 that are most easily accessible. So they give you the full travel paddles with the DualSense Edge, but they also give you some half domes that are really easy to hit. I'm totally gonna leave those on the controller at all times because they look so cool. The replaceable stick modules actually work, which is is great. So if you ever get stick drift in this thing, you're just going to be able to buy some new stick modules. The new glossy version of the like underside of the controller apparently doesn't attract too many smudges and it looks great. You've got the PlayStation buttons on the touchpad. Overall, it looks like the reviews are great and people are really liking the like lifted stick top that reminds them of the DualShock 2 and DualShock 3. I'm gonna be real, I'm putting that on as soon as I get this controller because I miss that texture that Sony used to have on their controllers. It had so much grip to it. It was great in games like Uncharted. So yeah, like the PS5 and it seems like the PSVR 2, this controller is a premium controller that people are generally really liking. It's $200. You can pre-order it right now. It comes out at the end of the week. I will have it linked down in the description. Now we got to talk about the most contentious PlayStation in the world right now, the PS5 Pro. So it's basically confirmed by everyone except Sony that we are getting a PS5 Slim by the end of the year, which was annoying to people who just got their hands on PS5s, but is really not turning out to be a huge deal because it's going to just streamline the console and allegedly look exactly the same as the one we all have sitting on our shelves at home right now. We've talked about that console a lot, and like I said, I'm pretty sure it's a done deal. We'll see that by the end of this year. I would guess around September, but we haven't heard anything or really even considered that we might also be getting a PS5 Pro in the middle of this year. But there's a new rumor out there that basically suggests that yes, not only are we getting a new PS5 Pro this year, it's going to have liquid cooling and we'll see it as soon as April. So this report's coming from a leaker who's basically got a 50-50 track record. It's no one like Tom Henderson or anything like those guys who run Insider Gaming, which is a great website you should definitely check out. So that's my first red flag with this report. And then secondly, it hasn't been corroborated by any of those guys just yet, which I feel like it would have been corroborated instantly by them if that was the case. The third red flag that presents itself here is just an optics one. I think it'd be kind of dumb for Sony to put out a Pro model of their console 6 months after the thing actually became available widely for people to pick up. I understand it with the Slim model because it's not changing in hardware style in any way, it seems, so it's not really gonna piss too many people off if they put out a new console and just basically say, hey, we wanna streamline the PS5, so we're putting out every model as a digital model, and some of them will come with an external disk drive, some of them will just have no disk drive, and you'll have to go out and get a disk drive if you end up wanting those. Like, that doesn't really seem like that big of a deal to me, especially considering it's not going to run any better than the current PS5 we have now. But something like a PS5 Pro, where they're gonna say, hey, maybe it's going to get 4K 60, or hey, maybe it's going to have 1440p 60, and then we'll start seeing games on the regular PS5 coming out with 30 FPS options exclusively, like we saw in A Plague Tale Requiem or Gotham Knights, and then I can kind of see why people would start getting upset. I mean, I would be pretty bummed about that, because I feel like in the past 2 years of having a PS5, Sony is just finally in 2023 starting to have games coming out for it that really are pushing the console in any way. You also have to consider how many leaks there have been with the PS5 Slim, which isn't really doing much to impress anyone. You gotta then look at the fact that the PS5 Pro would really be something people would wanna leak, and if the PS5 Slim is already out there, the Pro has gotta be out there as well, and we have heard nothing about this being in developers' hands. Am I saying that the PS5 Pro doesn't exist and that we're not gonna get one and Sony isn't even working on it? Hell no, I think we are definitely going to get a PS5 Pro. I just personally think it's not going to happen this year, and we really wouldn't even hear anything about it until 2024 or maybe even 2025. I think the reality of it is we have to expect a console like this just because Sony set the precedent of a mid-gen upgrade with the PS4 Pro and people seemingly adopted it across the board. The same thing with the Xbox One X. People really enjoyed that console as well. So if they can re-up in the middle of the generation and get the hardcore fans, aka the people who are able to get a PS5 in 2020, then they're totally gonna do that, and more power to them. It doesn't bug me in any way, because if you ask me which console I personally would be more excited to buy even in 2023, I'd obviously be much more stoked to spend some money on the one that's going to give me a performance improvement, but that's just me.